Welcome, everyone, to TechDaily.ai. I'm your host, David, and joining us to analyze today's tech landscape is our expert, Sophia.
Hey everyone, I'm really glad to be here.
Before we really get going, you can sponsor this podcast for just $25. Your message will be featured across major platforms like Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, and more. If you're interested, visit TechDaily.ai to get started today. So, to kick things off, I want you to think about what happens when you buy a standard physical appliance for your house.
Right, like a refrigerator or something.
Yeah, exactly. Or let's say you invest in a really high-end blender. There's this fundamental, almost unconscious expectation of ownership that just happens at the cash register. I mean, you pay your money, you put the appliance on your kitchen counter, and, well, it belongs to you.
Right, you own it entirely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, if the blades get a little dull 10 years from now or the motor gets slightly louder, that is just the natural wear and tear of a physical object. It's just interacting with the physical laws of the universe, right?
Yeah, and I think consumers inherently accept that bargain. I mean, a physical object degrades slowly based on friction, heat, how much you use it. It's a very clean, very predictable relationship between a person and their property.
But imagine waking up one morning and you go to make your morning smoothie and the blender is suddenly like spinning at half speed.
Oh, that would be incredibly annoying.
Right. And not because the motor is dying of old age or because the gears are stripped, but because the manufacturer literally sent a remote invisible signal into your kitchen to throttle the speed.
Which is just a wild concept when you apply it to a blender.
It really is. Suddenly, the manufacturer is essentially standing in your kitchen with you, just pulling the strings long after the financial transaction is supposedly over.
Yeah, and that scenario completely shatters the traditional definition of ownership. I mean, the physical hardware might be sitting right there on your counter, but the functionality, the actual utility you pay for, is being manipulated from hundreds of miles away.
And that blurring of the line between natural aging and artificial degradation is the core theme of our discussion today.
It is, yeah. We're looking at the invisible expiration dates on our gadgets. And specifically, we're looking at this through the lens of a massive, recently filed U.S. class action lawsuit against Amazon regarding their older Fire TV sticks.
Yeah, and to really grasp the frustration at the center of this lawsuit, we kind of have to travel back a bit. We need to look at the landscape when the Fire TV stick was first introduced and what it originally promised consumers.
Right, because the context here is huge.
Exactly, because when the first and second generation Fire TV sticks came out, which was around 2014 and 2016, they solved a massive problem for people.
They really did. I mean, people had these massive, heavy, flat-screen televisions mounted to their walls.
Beautiful screens, but completely dumb.
Yes, beautiful screens that were completely dumb. They couldn't connect to the internet at all. And the Fire TV stick was marketed heavily as the absolute easiest, most cost-effective way to just instantly turn a dumb screen into a smart device.
All right, the value proposition was just undeniable. I mean, for roughly $40, you plug this tiny thumb drive-sized piece of plastic into the HDMI port on the back of your television.
You connect it to your home Wi-Fi, and suddenly, boom, you have instant access to these massive digital libraries.
Netflix, YouTube, Prime Video, all right there.
All right there at your fingertips. It breathed new life into millions of older televisions, saving consumers from having to buy entirely new TV sets just to access modern streaming.
And the hardware inside those early sticks, it was perfectly tuned for what it needed to do at the time, right?
It was. I mean, we were talking about basic dual-core or quad-core processors and roughly 1 gigabyte of RAM.
Which doesn't sound like much now.
No, not at all. But in that era, the user interface was essentially just a static grid of movie posters. You scrolled, you clicked, a video played. It was very lightweight and snappy.
But the lawsuit we're examining today, which was filed by a plaintiff named Bill Merriwater, it paints a very different reality for the people who bought into those early promises.
Yeah, a much more frustrating reality.
Absolutely. The lawsuit essentially claims that these early models, the first and second generations, have become so incredibly sluggish, so entirely unstable, that they are effectively bricked.
And, the term bricked is doing a lot of heavy lifting in this legal complaint.
What do you mean by that exactly?
Well, historically, a bricked piece of tech meant the device suffered a catastrophic software failure. It literally could not power on. It became as useful as a physical brick.
Right, just a paperweight.
Exactly. But in this context, the complaint argues a functional bricking. The physical hardware itself is entirely fine. The processor hasn't melted, the memory sectors haven't failed, the HDMI connector still transmits a signal perfectly.
But the device can no longer perform its primary advertised function.
Right, because the software it is now forced to run is actively paralyzing the hardware.
It's analogous to, like, going to a dealership and buying a sports car because the marketing promises it can hit 100 miles an hour on the highway.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
And you drive it for a few years, everything functions exactly as advertised. Then the manufacturer decides to remotely tune the engine over the air under the guise of, mandatory system updates.
Oh, right.
And so that exact same car with the exact same physical engine can suddenly only drive 20 miles per hour. I mean, the engine isn't broken, the tires are fully inflated, but the car is now useless for highway driving.
Because the hardware has been artificially bottlenecked by a manufacturer's remote interference.
Exactly.
And that's exactly what the plaintiff argues here. They argue that these software updates actively compromise the user experience, transforming a device marketed specifically for its speed and instant access into something that, well, stutters, freezes, constantly reboots.
And just fails to load the most basic streaming application.
Right. It represents a fundamental degradation of the product you purchased. I mean, the user navigates to a setting, clicks the remote, and has to wait 30 seconds for the screen to even react.
But hold on, let me play devil's advocate for a second here.
Sure.
We have to look at the reality of modern software development, right? I mean, isn't it fundamentally impossible for tech companies to support 10-year-old hardware forever?
Well, yeah.
Because applications like Netflix and YouTube, they've grown exponentially more complex. They're pushing 4K resolution, high dynamic range color data, just massive code bases.
That's entirely true.
So wouldn't older hardware with a tiny processor and 1 gigabyte of RAM naturally just choke on modern internet demands?
It would. I mean, hardware absolutely has physical limits, and passive obsolescence is a completely real phenomenon.
Okay.
Like if a third-party app developer decides to stop supporting an old video codec, that app is going to stop working on older hardware, period.
Right. That just makes sense.
However, the nuance in this specific lawsuit is really critical here. The plaintiff argues this wasn't passive natural aging. It wasn't just third-party apps getting heavier.
No, so it was something else.
Yeah, the allegation focuses on the operating system itself, the Amazon-controlled user interface.
Okay, I see.
Modern updates transformed that lightweight, static grid of movie posters we talked about into a really heavy, dynamic environment.
Oh, right, with all the ads and everything.
Exactly. The home screen now features autoplaying, high-definition video advertisements, heavy graphical animations, and constant background telemetry that's just pinging remote servers to track user behavior.
Wow, so the device is essentially drowning in background processes before the user even attempts to open a streaming app.
Exactly. The processor cycles and the limited memory are just entirely consumed by the operating system's new demands.
It's like a landlord forcing a tenant to move 50 heavy, modern, commercial-grade appliances into a tiny 10-year-old studio apartment.
That's a brilliant way to put it, yeah.
I mean, the physical walls of the apartment haven't shrunk, but the space is now so cluttered with heavy additions that the tenant can't even walk from the front door to the kitchen.
Right. The environment has been rendered unlivable by active choices made by the person controlling the property. And that perfectly illustrates the mechanism of the slowdown here. The underlying silicon simply cannot decode the heavy new video ads and process the background telemetry simultaneously without stuttering.
So the lawsuit is basically drawing a firm legal line between natural technological obsolescence, where a device just gets old, and active manipulation.
Yes, active manipulation where a manufacturer forces an operating environment onto a chip that they know mathematically simply cannot handle it.
Which brings us to the timeline, because this widespread sluggishness didn't just happen randomly, right?
Yeah, no, it didn't.
It was driven by a sudden shift in the software support timeline for the manufacturer. Because support for the first-generation Fire TV sticks officially ended in December 2022, with the second-generation devices following shortly after that.
And the critical discrepancy here is element that really fuels the legal fire in this complaint is the gap between when support actually ended and when consumers were told it would end.
Oh, right, because they promised a longer timeline.
Exactly. The lawsuit highlights claims that support would last until at least 2024. And, a stated support timeline is not just a casual promise.
No, I imagine it carries a lot of legal weight.
Immense legal weight. It directly influences consumer behavior. If a person knows a device will be supported for another 2 years, they might delay buying a replacement.
Of course.
If a company cuts that timeline short, they are potentially wading into the territory of false advertising or a breach of implied warranty.
And the aftermath of that broken timeline is really fascinating from a psychological perspective, because the complaint argues that the manufacturer didn't just passively walk away from the devices,
Right, they didn't just leave them alone.
and they didn't offer a way to roll back to a faster, older version of the software either. Instead, they allowed the slower performance and increasingly limited functionality to act as this subtle psychological tactic.
Yeah.
It basically operates as an invisible upgrade nudge.
It really is a brilliant, albeit super frustrating, strategy because of how it manipulates the user's perception.
How so?
Well, when a video stutters or a menu freezes, the average consumer sitting on their couch doesn't immediately jump to the conclusion that a massive tech conglomerate is actively suffocating their hardware's memory limits.
Right, they blame themselves.
Exactly. They assume their home Wi-Fi router is acting up.
Mm.
Or they wonder if the batteries in their remote are dying. They question their own equipment first.
And so the reduced stability creates this persistent low-level frustration that just builds over time.
Oh, absolutely.
And miraculously, that entire headache disappears the moment the consumer pulls out their credit card, spends another $40, and plugs the latest generation of the hardware into their television.
Which is awfully convenient, isn't it? The manufacturer never has to put a pop-up on the screen that explicitly says, your device is too old, buy a new one.
Right, the degraded software does all the demanding for them.
Exactly. And that dynamic, the ability to remotely control the operational environment of a piece of hardware sitting in your living room, introduces what is arguably the most crucial and controversial concept in this entire legal complaint.
And that is software tethering.
Yes, software tethering. As it's defined in the legal filings, software tethering is the stark reality that a device a consumer firmly believes they own remains completely and utterly dependent on software controlled by the manufacturer.
It really functions like a digital umbilical cord that never, ever gets cut.
That's exactly what it is.
Because when a consumer goes to the electronics store and buys a smart streaming stick, they are purchasing the physical plastic casing, the silicon chip soldered to the board, and the metal HDMI connector. They physically carry that item into their home.
But the manufacturer retains total, unyielding, permanent control over its brain.
Right. It's wild.
And looking back historically, this is a massive shift in the consumer technology landscape.
How so?
Well, 20 years ago, when you bought a piece of physical media, say, a standalone DVD player, it was a completely closed ecosystem. The software required to run the machine was permanently baked into the hardware.
Oh, right. It never updated.
Exactly. It
Right.
worked identically on day one as it did on day 1000, right up until the internal laser burned out or the motor died.
The manufacturer had no physical or digital mechanism to reach into your living room and alter how the DVD player functioned after the sale was complete.
Exactly. But now we're filling our homes with hardware that acts merely as an empty vessel.
Yeah, the physical device is just a delivery mechanism for software services that are hosted in the cloud.
And it essentially operates on an everything is a subscription model, even if the consumer paid the entire purchase price up front at the cash register.
So the user doesn't genuinely own a gadget anymore. They are essentially just licensing the right to use it for as long as the manufacturer deems that arrangement profitable.
Which is a huge problem. This shift entirely upends the traditional rules of consumer protection and the legal doctrine of first sale.
I bet regulators are starting to notice this.
Oh, they definitely are. Regulators globally are beginning to heavily scrutinize this exact post-sale control. Lawmakers are asking whether it's fair or even legal to have the rug pulled out from under consumers based on internal corporate timelines that are never clearly communicated at the point of sale.
Right. Because if a company can dictate the death of a device remotely, simply by pushing a line of code that demands more RAM than the device actually possesses, the consumer is at a massive informational and financial disadvantage.
A massive disadvantage.
So if we look at the immediate legal fallout of this specific class action lawsuit, the plaintiffs are actually seeking substantial remedies here.
They are, yeah.
They're asking for damages, restitution, and compensation for all the affected users of those first and second generation Fire TV sticks. They really are demanding financial accountability for the broken timeline promises and the artificially degraded performance.
And while the financial restitution is obviously important for the affected users, the broader implications of this lawsuit are what could reshape the entire tech industry.
What do you think happens if they win?
Well, if the plaintiffs secure a victory, or even just a substantial settlement, it forces a massive legal acknowledgement of software tethering. It sets a precedent that manufacturers simply cannot hide behind the veil of mandatory system updates to purposefully render older hardware obsolete.
Wow, imagine a world where a legal victory here forces tech companies to change their entire retail model.
That would be revolutionary.
We could start seeing exact, legally binding expiration dates printed right on the physical box in the retail store.
Oh, I would love that.
Right, just like flipping over a box of cereal to check the nutritional label, a consumer could flip over a piece of electronics and see a label that explicitly states, guaranteed to stream at full speed and receive critical UI updates until December 31st, 2030.
That would bring some much-needed transparency to a deeply murky ecosystem. I mean, consumers would finally be able to calculate the true cost of ownership before they buy.
Exactly.
Furthermore, a precedent here might force companies to fundamentally alter how they deploy software updates in the first place.
Like giving users a choice.
Yes. They might be legally required to offer users the choice to opt out of heavy graphical updates that would demonstrably degrade their specific hardware.
That makes so much sense.
If an update requires 2 gigabytes of RAM to run smoothly, and the device only has 1, the manufacturer would have to allow the user to remain on the older, lighter operating system.
It just forces everyone, consumers, lawmakers, and the tech giants themselves, to ask a highly uncomfortable question.
Yeah, it does.
When your streaming stick starts stuttering, freezing, and failing to load, is it simply aging gracefully? Or is its lifespan being actively manipulated long after you handed over your money?
It's a question we all need to be asking.
Definitely. Let's take a moment to just recap the journey of our discussion today. We started by examining the specific, highly frustrating sluggishness of those early Fire TV sticks. These were devices that promised instant, magical access to streaming libraries, but eventually felt like they were running through molasses, just completely overwhelmed by heavy new operating environments, autoplaying video ads, and background telemetry that their older processors physically could not handle.
And then we analyzed the timeline discrepancy. The promises of software support lasting until 2024, which starkly contrasted with the reality of those updates being cut off in late 2022.
Right.
We unpacked how that artificially degraded performance functions as a subtle psychological nudge, basically convincing consumers that their equipment is failing and pushing them to upgrade to newer hardware simply to regain the basic functionality they originally paid for.
Yeah, and most importantly, we broadened the scope to look at the industry-wide phenomenon of software tethering.
The big picture.
Exactly. The realization that buying a piece of hardware today doesn't guarantee you actually control it. I mean, this extends far beyond a single $40 streaming stick. We are talking about similar questions being raised for smartphones, tablets, and connected devices from every major giant in the tech space.
It really highlights a massive societal shift from owning a product to indefinitely renting a capability. The consumer is entirely at the mercy of the manufacturer's remote software deployments.
Yeah.
And this lawsuit represents one of the first major organized legal attempts to push back against that unbalanced dynamic.
Which brings us to a final thought I really want to leave you, the listener, with today. We've spent all this time talking about a relatively inexpensive piece of plastic you plug into the back of your television.
Right, $40.
But think about the broader trend in consumer electronics. We are enthusiastically filling our homes with ever more smart appliances.
Oh yeah, the smart home revolution.
Right. We are installing multi-thousand-dollar refrigerators with massive touchscreens embedded right in the doors. We are wiring complex smart thermostats directly into the walls of our homes.
We're buying connected ovens that download new cooking presets over the Wi-Fi network. It's everywhere.
It really is.
And the footprint of software tethering is expanding exponentially into the most critical infrastructure of our daily lives. I mean, the financial investment required for these appliances is massively higher than a streaming stick, making the risk of artificial obsolescence far more damaging to the average household.
Exactly. And so, as that digital umbilical cord attaches itself to more and more vital components of our homes, you have to wonder, how long until an arbitrary, invisible software update sent in the middle of the night decides that your perfectly functional physical kitchen appliance is officially obsolete?
It's a terrifying thought.
How long until your refrigerator's compressor works perfectly, but the door refuses to dispense ice because the touchscreen's operating system is no longer supported by the manufacturer's remote servers.
Yeah, what do you do then? Buy a new fridge.
Right. It is a scenario that is inching closer to reality every single day, and something to deeply ponder the next time your seemingly perfect physical gadget locks your screen and demands that you install a mandatory system update.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for joining us here at TechDaily.ai. We encourage you to keep questioning the technology in your everyday lives, look past the shiny marketing of the latest smart devices, and we will be right here to help you make sense of it all. Take care, everyone.